Welcome to Becoming and Belonging, a journey of identity and culture. I'm your host, Amy Huggins from Ascension Wellness. Each week, we embark on a journey of discovering who we truly are, navigating the nuance of identity and culture, and learning what it means to belong in our own skin and in the world. We are talking today about discovering who you are after divorce. Our guest, Jeff Kolez, grew up in Toronto, Canada, and found his way into tech. He liked tech, and some even said that he was good at it. While tech definitely scratched the logical side of his spirit, life felt hollow and incomplete. Life has a way of teaching us, or teaching you, the exact lesson you need to learn, and one day it arrived in the form of a nasty divorce. It was a pain that he couldn't run away from. He was now facing a people problem. He wasn't prepared. He had built a life that understood logic and technology, but was lacking a deep understanding of people. Rather than escaping, he made a decision to face it. This was the decision that changed the course of his life. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell us a little more about that journey and experience for you.
I like the introduction said, I ended up in tech, and tech is so black and white, and it's this or that. It's, if any of the listeners have ever done any programming, it's an if-then statement. So if it's this, it's that, or it's that. So if it might be good or bad, but reality isn't like that. It's not black and white, and we're people and we run on emotions. And I didn't understand that back in the day. So being married is a lot of emotions. And if you don't understand that, you're in a lot of trouble, especially in any long-term relationship. And a marriage is 10 times that, especially once you have kids, because the emotions get layered on top of each other. And you can't logic your way out of that. You have to learn to understand why you're acting in a certain way by understanding the emotions that you're feeling, but then that also gets mixed in with how your partner's acting and her emotions. I didn't understand any of that. So it turned into a car crash, and it was just miserable.
And I know you know this, but you are so not alone. I think that I know that many of us have our own versions of that experience, both in and out of marriage, where we have just learned through many different channels to shut off that emotional part of ourselves or to run faster before it catches up. I wonder what your experience with was that leading up to that car crash
With my wife?
with your emotions.
Oh, with my emotions. Oof, that's talking about that is it's like talking about somebody completely different. Like it doesn't, I don't even quite resonate with that person anymore. Emotions were something to be escaped from back then.
Mhm.
And the result of that was I was always feeling crappy.
Yeah.
But I never understood why. Like I always thought like I just need this. I would chase a lot of external things at the time, and I would escape through escapism, movies, alcohol, the food, the things people normally escape using. And but that's not living. That's escaping. That's running. And you don't get what you want out of life if you're always running.
So true.
So by yeah, by and I was probably running from my marriage too. And by doing that, I wasn't connecting to her on an emotional level, which is probably what she needed. And it's not a mystery why it ended up that way.
Yeah. It's really interesting that you said that you feel like you were a different person back then, that you just don't even resonate with that version of who you used to be.
Yeah. So the difference, and I don't think a lot of men talk about tuning into emotions, and I completely understand why. At the time, we were not particularly well off, and money was a struggle. We were just starting out. We just had two kids and just bought a new house, and everything was like very white knuckled. So at the time, you don't have time for emotions.
Mhm.
That was my mindset. The difference now is that emotions to me, there's gold inside of them, and they are telling me something about the situation I'm in. My goal is a baseline level. And if I'm experiencing a high or a low, I want to look inside to see what that high or low is. And that's giving me feedback about what I'm doing, what's going on right now. So I'm remarried, and we struggled for a long time because we both came from divorces, and I think we both struggled to understand who the other person was and what they had been through.
Mhm.
And when you listen on an emotional level, I know I can speak for myself. I know I was feeling fear that I was going to have to go through every time we had an argument. I would feel fear, and then that would come out as anger.
Yeah.
And so the gold inside was learning to listen to what that fear was, and then look for the truth of that emotion. So one of the examples I like to give is if your previous partner had an affair and then your new partner is looking at her phone all the time, that might bring up an emotion, but is that emotion truth? Is she on her phone because she's having an affair? Probably not. It
Right.
might be, but learning to listen to what's going on under the surface tells you a lot. And that it can for it it can be applied not only for relationships but also business. I worked with a guy who his business partner was an alcoholic, and he would disappear on benders. He would be gone for a week. And he eventually divorced that business partner, only to find a new business partner who was also an addict. And he had to face some uncomfortable truths around himself that he was, you know, drinking every night.
Right.
And you're going to repeat that pattern until you confront yourself, until you look inside and find what that gold is,
Mhm.
the reason you're experiencing that emotion. And I realize I threw a lot at you. There's a lot to unpack in there. But until you solve that emotion, you're going to repeat that pattern.
Exactly. And it's like we externalize our internal state. So when we're suppressing particular emotions or particular patterns, we're going to find ways to recreate that externally. That was a great example with the guy who divorced one business partner only to marry the next business partner to repeat similar patterns.
It
And
happens a lot.
it does happen a lot, yes. And we do it in so many different ways and across all different types of relationships until we're able to come to a place where we're able to look in the mirror and confront what we see there and work through what we see there.
It's very uncomfortable to hold up that mirror to ourselves. Like
Right.
we look at the other person and go, you're at fault here. But what my wife and I like to do is say, when you point the finger at somebody, there's three more pointing back at you.
Yeah.
And usually with us, we've done this work enough where that's a wake up call to look at yourself. And we don't say it like from ego. We're trying to say it like, why are you feeling this way? Why are you saying that about me? Or what's going on with you? Are you okay?
Yeah. So you're talking about each of us taking responsibility for our own emotions.
Yeah, 100%. Now, I don't find this gets talked about a lot with men, and that's unfortunate. And so the reason I give that experience with that businessman is Emotions, we push down emotions to get through the day sometimes. I used to have a job in Toronto, in the city. It was in like an hour commute. I hated it. It made me angry in the morning, but I would push down that emotion to go to work, to make money, and then to come back. And I understand that happens. But what happens over time is you keep pushing those emotions down and they're going to explode at some point. And if you are not processing them and allowing them to get out, it's gonna bite you in the ass.
Big time. It's the pot of boiling water, right? That lid's going to blow.
Yeah, 100%. And so I'm encouraging men to look at the emotions so that they're not repeating that pattern and that they don't explode at some point.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I focus on divorce is that is usually the point where men, where I've experienced that men are willing to have that look.
Mm.
There's something I call the baseball bat moment. Maybe the better metaphor maybe is the feathered brick and truck. You might have heard of that. So life teaches us lessons, or it tries to. Often it comes with the feather, and we see the feather and we go, I don't have time to deal with that. Then life throws a brick at us and it goes, you better pay attention to this. And we go, it kind of hurt, but I can deal with it. Then comes the truck and you're not ignoring the truck. So I call that the baseball bat moment, the truck, whatever you want to call it. To me, a divorce is a baseball bat. It's a truck. You cannot ignore, you cannot continue to, you can, but life is bringing your attention to this particular circumstance.
Right.
You can ignore it or not. And so usually men are more open to discussing emotions at that point and the role they've played to, I call it waking them up out of that emotional dream.
Mm. That's such a great way to look at it. It really does feel like well, once you wake up and you look back, it really does feel like you had been living your entire life in a dream state.
Or a
Nothing felt
nightmare.
quite real, yes, or a nightmare. Nothing felt quite real, and yet at the same time felt way too real. And you never know
Yeah,
where you're coming or going. It's confusing, it's overwhelming.
that's why I can't relate to that old version of me, because it's every time I would do this emotional work, it's letting a veil up.
Mhm.
And you cover somebody up with enough veil and you're not going to recognize them, or you're not going to recognize yourself. And that's why I don't recognize me of 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. It's a completely different person. You change your emotions, you change your world.
Yeah.
Your emotions are one of your drivers. And if you're no longer driven by whatever that emotion is, then your world is different.
Extremely. And I've had my own experience with that too. I've been through two divorces actually. And when I was in my second marriage, when I would look back, I would forget that I ever had been married before because that first marriage felt like remembering someone else's life. I was just such a different
Yep.
person in a different place. And when I would remember it, almost felt, wait, did that actually happen? Do other people know that person, or is that just some figment of my imagination? And
Yeah.
now I'm experiencing that again, having gone through a second divorce. The person I was in that second marriage is still light years different. I am light years different now than when I was in that marriage.
Yeah. I would understand that. The more inner work you do, the more different you're going to feel from yesterday. And it's no, I don't know that a lot of people necessarily look inside. If I think 50% of first marriages fail, and then 60% of second marriages fail, and then 70% of third marriages fail. To me, that's not an indication that marriage itself is a broken institution, but it's that the people aren't doing the work.
Right.
They're not looking at what led them to that failure. They're just doing the same. doing the same thing every day and expecting something different. Isn't that the joke, the definition of insanity?
Exactly.
Yeah,
And that's an important distinction too, right? It's not that the institution of marriage is the problem. And that can be true of everything. Everywhere you go, there you are. So every institution that we are a part of, we're still reflecting or projecting outward whatever our internal state is. So if we're not doing the work, then we might perceive the institution of marriage as being the problem, or we might perceive the education system as being the problem, or the political system, or whatever it is. But when we can flip that around and look inside and do that work, now we're going to start projecting very different stories.
100%. And it's interesting you said political. I'm not political at all, but we just had
Yeah.
yeah, an election. And I think a marriage or a long-term relationship is a chance to really look inside. I believe one of the purposes of life is to learn how to go as deep into yourself as you can. And in a relationship, it's like having somebody hold up a mirror to you at all times, and you're going to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And your choice is, do I run from that bad and ugly, or do I take a long look and decide that you're going to change? And that's the difference between old Jeff and new one, and is I'm willing to look at that ugliness. And I hope more people do too.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I love that you call it the baseball bat moment. That's exactly what it feels like, that moment when you find yourself brought to your knees,
Yep.
when maybe you thought you were so invincible or at least stronger, but then that moment you're on the ground, just, oh. But we do have a choice. That is that pivotal moment where, okay, I can stick to my guns and I can continue to blame other people or blame institutions or whatever the case may be. Or maybe I can stay on my knees a little longer and look at this whole thing from a different perspective and humble myself and meet myself with self-compassion. But that's taking the painful path, right? That's the road less traveled. I wonder what you have to say. How does a person choose that path?
One of my mentors says there's two stages to human spiritual evolution. Everybody goes through stage one, not everybody goes through stage two. Stage one is judgments. So I don't want to be that, or I want to be that. That is not good, and I'll never end up like that. As soon as you're thinking that, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And then the second is running from discomfort to comfort. When you have that, you're constantly seeking comfort. You will never change if you're always chasing comfort, if you're always chasing pleasure.
Mm.
The way into stage two, and what stage two is, you're driven by inspiration. You see a separation between your thoughts, your emotions, and you. So that's stage two. The gateway from stage one to stage two is by turning and confronting those difficult moments. So, like I said, everybody experiences stage one, where you're driven by emotions, where you're running from good to bad, or sorry, from bad to good, but not everybody experiences stage two. Stage two is much calmer. You're driven by inspiration, like I said, and you can act from the heart. And the heart is much safer. Your thoughts, they're not safe. Your thoughts are driven by ego. And when you're feeling anxiety, usually you're in your thoughts
Mhm.
because that's where logic lives. But here, you're acting from, if you want to get, if we're going woo, that you're acting from your higher self. You're acting from a place where you don't have emotions and you you're separate from your thoughts.
Mhm.
Um, so my advice is to turn into those negative feelings, those difficult moments, because that's what's going to get you into that next stage.
And there's a purity in that next stage, that authentic self, that higher self. There's this purity there that is unmuddied both by emotions, which are important but can also be misleading, and it's unmuddied by logic, which is also important but can be
Hmm.
misleading.
Hmm.
But in that space where we are kind of removed from the brain, the polarizing of our brains with too much logic or too much emotion, we're in that purity of just truth.
It's a lightness too. You feel
Yeah.
lighter. It's centeredness. You're not swinging back and forth, like swinging from logic to emotion and back and forth. And that's exhausting. When you're centered, you feel so calm and invigorated. And I find that the decisions I make from the heart is much clearer and much more, usually has a more positive outcome. If I logic something to death, usually that ends up in the best way I can describe it is it ends up in a cold place. Like it's minus the humanity. If I make a decision out of emotion, you're in trouble there. But the heart is the center.
The center in more ways than one.
Absolutely.
That's a powerful analogy. And the unfortunate part is moving from that first stage into that second stage. What's the phrase? The only way past is through. And
Hmm.
so when people turn that way, they, okay, I want to move forward, but ugh, that's where all the pain lives. That's where like death, destruction, and mayhem, they just don't realize, yes, that is true. And if you can just get through that, or when you get through that, man, it's just a completely different world on the other side.
That's, yeah, there's layers to it, right? Take divorce for an example. If divorce is your gateway from stage one to stage two, you have to go through the divorce. And that's unpleasant enough. If you choose that gateway and face it head on what happens is you start to disconnect from the stories you're telling yourself. And stories I'm using here as an analogy for emotions, our stories are emotions, and we carry them with us. As you unhook from those stories, it becomes disorientating.
Mm.
You realize that you have been driven by stories a lot of your life. And as you disconnect from those stories, you can feel, like I said, disoriented, and you can have some people call it a dark night of the soul. And I've been through that many times. And you don't know who you are and why you're doing something. And I find this such a fascinating place to be. There's all sorts of possibilities as to who you can become. And I'm speaking at really from a mystical place almost. There's all kinds of places, there's all kinds of people you could become, but you don't know who you are. So you feel really disconnected.
Mhm.
So you have to go through that unpleasantness of the divorce. Then you have to go through the unpleasantness of the dark night of the soul. Then you get to the next level. And it's almost like this double discomfort. But then you come out of it and the world feels bigger and you feel like a different person and you feel like you're more capable and connected.
Yeah.
So if you're in that, if you're feeling disconnected, discombobulated, if you're in that dark night of the soul, keep going. Don't. Lots of people give up and go back to the old way, or they want to go back to the old way. Don't. Keep going, because that's where life is steering you.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me of the process that the caterpillar goes through to become the butterfly. If we could anthropomorphize a caterpillar in this
Hmm.
example, they have no idea they're going to become a butterfly. What's a butterfly? That's a completely separate animal. They look nothing alike.
Hmm.
Yet when they're in the cocoon, it's like they dissolve and become this goo. they literally unbecome. There's no identity there. There's no, I cannot even imagine the terror. I can't imagine. I've been through my own dark night of the soul, but it's that terror of, yes, there's no attachment to anything or to anyone. Who am I? Who is anything? What is anything? You just feel so completely lost and
Hmm.
rudderless, and there's not a breeze in the world to help you along your way. You're just stuck in that unbecoming state. So, yeah, it's perfectly natural for the tendency to be, oh my gosh, I'm losing my mind here. Let me retreat back to reality. Even though that was painful and I was trying to grow away from that, it's better than this. But yeah,
Yeah.
the invitation is to keep going, trust the process.
It's that's where my coaching, that's what I'm interested in, is helping people through that, because it's so disorienting. And it's so weird that you still wake up in the morning, make breakfast, make yourself a coffee, go to work, drive to work, go to do your job, but you're disoriented. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, you still have your routine, but you feel disconnected from everything. That's usually an indication that you're going through something. Just
Exactly.
keep
That's
going.
a really good indication too. And I always wonder when I'm just out and about, grocery shopping, whatever, running errands, and I stop sometimes and just look at all the people around me and wonder what's going on inside. Is
Hmm.
that person in their dark night of the soul and they're just going through the motions right now? Because to all outward appearances, if we don't know someone, you would never know. They could be in the deepest, darkest moments of their life and you would never know.
I wonder that too. And I also wonder if if they're just trapped in their own stories, and they're just going about being a programmer originally. I think of emotions almost as programs that are just running in our heads. And so I think a lot of people just tend to be unconsciously unaware that they've got these little programs running in the back of their heads, and they're just going about their day.
Yeah.
It's only when one of those programs crash that do they start asking questions. So, how you're absolutely right. How many people are going through their dark nights of the soul, but how many people are just letting those programs run?
Yeah. Probably most of us. We rely on programs we don't know are even there.
Somebody told me that the conscious mind is the size of a football, and the subconscious is the size of the football field.
Mm.
So, if that's the case, then there's a lot that we're not aware of that's going on there.
It almost feels like being in kindergarten. You have your whole educational future laid out in front of you. But at least
Yeah.
in kindergarten, you know that, right? There's a track laid out. In modern Western society, we don't have a framework
No.
for these sort of events and stages in life.
No. And I think I can speak personally. I'm pretty sure that's how I ended up where I ended up. I didn't have that guidance of
Right.
this is what an emotion is. It's funny, just before this, I'm away from my kids right now. I just hung up with, and he was asking me, he's going to the gym 3 days a week. And he's, how do I know when I get to the point where I'm happy?
Mm,
And I was like, you need to listen. What's going on here?
yeah.
Should I? And he said, I'm getting he's in university. I'm getting 80s. I don't know that I want to go for 95. 80 is hard enough. Like, that difference is the rest of my life is going to get out of balance.
Mm,
He won't have time to go to the gym. He won't have time to hang out with his friends. And all of that matters. It's not just about putting, if you get that one area out of whack, if you put way more effort into one area of life, you're going to get, that's how you get the baseball bat moment.
yeah.
So I encouraged him to make sure he has a balance over all of those things.
It's that full spectrum. I use a very similar analogy, and we talk about the balance of life, like work-life balance or balance in general. And there's a lot of cynicism around that now because people have tried so hard and still can't achieve it. So then, oh, that's not even possible. It's a pipe dream. And then when coaches like us come along saying, no, you can do it, it can be
Yeah.
frustrating. And I describe it as a wheel. So
Hmm.
if you picture, I always picture the wheels on carts, like old school horse and buggy
Hmm.
carts. And all of those spokes have each of those pie pieces
Mhm.
represents a different area of our life, like you were just describing for your son. If we're paying attention to the grades in school to the exclusion of the
Mhm.
other pieces of that wheel, those other pieces are going to be smaller and that piece is going to be bigger. And now when that wheel goes round and round, that's going to be a bumpy ride.
That I completely agree. What I find happens is maybe it's more men my age is we tend to put a lot of emphasis on career and
Mhm.
finance. And maybe those level up. Maybe they're eights out of tens, not but we stop paying attention to maybe our relationship or our physical health. And maybe that's only a two. And whack, we get the baseball bat. And that's where a divorce comes in. And that's where, and I think a lot of us derive a lot of our identity because we are going after, we feel powerful at work.
Mm.
So of course we want to put our attention there. So it's painful to turn down the amount of effort we put into work to put it into our relationship. But that's what life is telling us. And sometimes when you do that, the rest of the wheel kind of balances itself out. And that's when you can move outward further. Using your analogy of the wheel, you level it all up the same. If you balance it, it runs smoother and then you can grow it better.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
sustainable, it's authentic, it feels good. It's a
Yeah.
win.
It
Easy.
flows.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, you have a gift for the audience. Tell us a little bit about that.
I have so if you're going through a dark night of the soul, I have a starter kit on my website, divorce-daddy.com. And there's a box on the front. Put your email address in there, and I'll send you my starter kit on how to move through that dark night of the soul, or how to get through those difficult moments, how to put the baseball bat into perspective.
Perfect. So, I definitely hope people go check that out. That sounds like a very useful kit. I'm so glad that you brought that. And I wonder if you have any final thoughts for our listeners.
It's when you're going through something difficult, fall back on the basics. Don't try to overcomplicate it. Fall back to the basics. If you're having a difficult moment at the grocery store, for example, go back to the breath. Just quietly find the breath, feel it in the body, and that difficult moment will pass.
This too shall pass.
This too shall pass.
And that's a beautiful example, a beautiful tool that we can all carry with us, a powerful tool because we all breathe.
It sounds so simple, but not enough people do it. Just do it.
It's funny, many years ago, I learned that I have a tendency to just stop breathing. And when
Mm,
I first became aware of that, it's like, what is that about? How do we stop breathing? But I'm really good at forgetting to breathe. And it's the body going into that freeze state I now know. But that simple reminder to just come back to the breath allows for us to access that flow again. It's game.
100%. Yep.
Jeff, thank you so much for joining me. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Amy. I had a great time.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Becoming and Belonging. I'd love to hear from you. What was your biggest takeaway from today's episode? Share your thoughts, reflections, any questions that came up. You can connect on social media or leave a comment wherever you're tuning in to keep the conversation going. If you found this episode meaningful, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might benefit from it. Until next time, keep growing, keep healing, and remember, you belong here.